Okay, let's get started now. So I imagine folks will pop in throughout. It is so nice to virtually be connected with all of you. We are excited to get started. So this is the Highway 413 Costing the Future workshop, and we'll get right into introductions. Next slide, please. So my name is Irlia Rasul. I'm the founder and executive director at Terra Elysium Foundation, and I will turn it over to Karina to introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Karina. I am Data and Innovation Manager at Terra. Thank you all for coming today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joel, and I am the Policy and Contracts Officer at Terra, and I can't wait to get started.
Hi everyone, my name is Shaniqua and I am the Communication and Content Manager here at Terra, and I'm so excited for you all being here today.
Hello, my name is Tina, and I'm the Executive Support Specialist here at Terra Elysium, and I'm super excited to interact with you guys.
Hi everyone, I'm Erica. I'm the Marketing and Development Coordinator at Terra and excited to meet you guys.
Jennifer, and then we can do Michaela and Nazia.
Hi everyone, my name is Jennifer. I'm the Community Outreach Manager for Terra, and I'm so glad to see everyone joining us today, and I look forward to this event. Thank you.
I think I'm up next. My name's Izzy. I'm the media specialist here at Terra. We've been working really hard to get this workshop ready for you guys, so I'm really excited to hear everyone presenting and also to have a good discussion going. Thanks for coming.
Michaela and Nazia.
Hello, I hope you're doing well. My name is Nadia Sanzoga. I'm the culture coordinator at Terra Elysium, and I'm super excited to see you all here. And I hope you enjoy today's session. Thank you.
Okay, let's hop into the next slide. Michaela is our grants manager. Next slide. Yep, perfect. So just a few quick notes about information and just a little helpful etiquette. Little helpful etiquette for our session. So this session is going to be recorded. However, feel free to turn off your cameras if you do not feel comfortable. Our team will keep our cameras on just so all of you feel more comfortable and you know who's presenting, as well as maintain respectful language and tone throughout the session. Of course, even if somebody doesn't agree with you, it is a learning session for everybody here. Respect the privacy of others. Do not share any personal information in the chat or on your mic. And then if you encounter any technical difficulties, reach out to our supports for assistance. They are going to paste the Instagram link into the chat right now. So you can just shoot a DM to us on Instagram, and then mute your microphone to minimize background noise. Engagement certificates will be emailed to all of you for your participation, and we'll get the emails for that at the end when we send out our feedback survey. Next slide. So a quick overview of our table of contents for today. So our first section is, of course, understanding what Highway 413 is, overview, Ontario's infrastructure planning, and the current political landscape. Section number 2 is the environmental and social impacts. So what are they, and are there any environmental policies that can be used for protection? Section 3 is alternative solutions. So we'll look at sustainable transportation, we'll look at a cost benefit analysis, and we'll also look at case studies. And our final section will be all about advocacy and action. So it'll be strategies for advocating for change, as well as a fun little engagement activity. Next slide. So I usually love to start off with quotes, and this one is a combination of a variety of texts and my own personal reflections over the years. So the quote goes, "A truly sustainable urban future is one that thrives on shared spaces, shared resources, and shared opportunities." And this quote essentially highlights that sustainability in urban development goes beyond environmental goals. It's about equity and shared benefits. Public services like transit, parks, and utilities must prioritize the greater good, ensuring fair resource allocation. A pivotal note here is that sustainable cities should integrate both natural spaces, that foster coexistence between people and nature, that promote an overall balance and accessibility with everyone, as well as opportunities for everyone to thrive. Next slide. So our first section, what is Highway 413? Now, Highway 413 is a proposed 52, next slide. Yeah, Highway 413 is a proposed 52-kilometer highway in Ontario, and it's classified as a 400 series highway. It is designed to connect Highway 400 near King Vaughan Road to the Highway 401 and 407 ETR interchange near Halton Hills. This route would pass through York, Peel, and Halton regions, as well as the highway design includes a 4-kilometer extension and a 3-kilometer extension of Highway 427. So it brings the total length to about 59 kilometers. And the provincial government has stated that the highway will accommodate a 170-meter wide right-of-way, potentially including dedicated lanes for public transit. Now, when we look at trying to understand what Highway 413 is, we also need to understand what is it intended to solve. So the main problem that Highway 413 is intended to solve is the growing traffic congestion in the Greater Golden Horseshoe. So the region is experiencing rapid population and economic growth, which is anticipated to lead to 1.5 additional daily trips by 2031. The highway is positioned as an alternative route for vehicles traveling across the western parts of the Greater Toronto Area, potentially reducing pressures on existing highways like the 401 and 407. So essentially, Highway 413 is supposed to enable a more efficient movement of goods and commuters, which is a key focus of transportation development in Ontario. Now, when we're looking at what the current timeline is and the current status, you may be wondering, where does all of that stand in terms of completion? So as of December 2024, so just last month, 90% of the preliminary design work has been completed. The project is expected to enter construction phase this year in 2025, pending completion of final approvals and potential environmental reviews. However, internal documents from June 2023 have indicated that the Ministry of Transportation, also known as the MTO, had no commitment to a deadline, meaning that in terms of the completion of the project, the environmental clearances, all of that could take several years. So we don't actually know how long this project is going to take. Next slide, please. Another important factor of Highway 413 is, of course, understanding what the population in Ontario is. So as of July 1st, 2023, the GTA has an estimated population of 7,354,000 people. This represents approximately 45.6% of Ontario's total population, which is 16,124,000. So it is very clear that the concentration of nearly half of Ontario's population really needs this robust transportation infrastructure. And especially when it comes to high volume transportation like public transportation, this is something that's really needed for overall challenges like mobility, congestion, and environmental sustainability in this high density region. Next slide. So I'm actually going to screen share here a map. Give me 1 second. So you guys can get a closer look at the overall view of what Highway 413 is. So taking a look at this map, you'll see this red area is, of course, the highway itself right here. You guys can probably see my little cursor going over. That is, of course, the highway. Something really important is this wonderful legend right here, and this indicates what each land cover is essentially referring to. So yellow is super important as it refers to agricultural land. You'll see all these little rivers and creeks, and then you'll see all these different areas. So the first thing I wanted to point out, oh, and the other thing is this green area with the yellow stripes going through it, that of course indicates the green belt, and then these deep green areas indicate forests. So to understand impact when looking at a map like this, we need to examine three key factors. The first factor I want to focus on is the rivers impacted by Highway 413. So starting with Credit River right here, you can see that this highway goes through a lot of these little creeks and these water systems. And specifically what that's going to do is impact biodiversity, water quality, and flood control. The next river along this along this route is actually Etobicoke Creek right here. And this is really important for agricultural zones and as well as, of course, flood management and water quality as well. And the last big river is the West Humber River and the East Humber River up here. And you can see this really doesn't do it justice to all the little creeks and rivers that are on this map. And essentially, this highway is really threatening the ecological species, basically the land use, and a lot of these systems. Now, the second big factor here is this yellow land cover that I had initially mentioned, which is agricultural area. And Highway 413 cuts through prime agricultural land, specifically within Halton Hills, Brampton, of course, as well. And these high quality lands, which represent only 0.5% of Canada's total land base, are essential for food production. So they are super, super valuable soils that are really needed for our food and agricultural production. And this highway is going to cause a lot of fragmentation within these really important areas. Now, beyond this, another really key factor is, of course, the green belt. The highway is cutting through the green belt right here, and of course, right here as well. So the green belt, and we're going to chat about this more as we go on, is Ontario's protected lands. And it's super important for farmland, for forests, wetlands, and watersheds. Next slide, please, and I will stop screen sharing. And Tina can get back to screen sharing. Yep.
Ontario's infrastructure. So Ontario has committed over $190 billion in a 10-year plan to expand and renew infrastructure all across the province. So this includes things like schools, where the government is trying to address needs of the growing population by building and improving educational facilities, hospitals, by enhancing healthcare access and services across Ontario, public transit. Their goal is to reduce congestion and offer sustainable and efficient travel options, roads and bridges, which would strengthen and expand critical transportation routes, as well as high-speed internet, which would ensure connectivity in rural and underserved areas, which is vital for economic and social development. So significant investments in public infrastructure have been made through public-private partnerships, also known as P3s. So a P3 is essentially a collaboration between the government and the private sector to finance, build, and maintain public infrastructure. These partnerships are supposed to help deliver a project on time and within budget. Significant infrastructure projects such as transit systems and hospitals have been completed through P3s. P3s have allowed the government as well to tap into private sector expertise and share project risks. Some examples of P3 are the current Eglinton Crosstown and Finch LRT under Metrolinx, as well as one critical infrastructure project that is also a P3 is Highway 413, which was designed to improve transportation across the GTA. And Highway 413 is planned to connect Highway 400 with Highways 401 and 407. That will offer a new route for drivers in the GTA. And it's intended to reduce travel times, relieve traffic congestion, and support the movement of goods across the region. And in terms of the controversy, Highway 413 has faced significant environmental and community concerns, and the government right now is trying to balance the economic needs with sustainability goals. Next slide. So Ontario's 400 series highways form a key network of controlled access freeways, similar to the US interstate system and Quebec's autoroutes. These highways link cities, airports, and border crossings, and they are built at high standards with speed limits of 100 to 110 kilometers per hour across the network. So if you look at the map here, you'll see most of the Series 400 highways are circled in pink. Some key highways include Highway 401, which is the busiest highway in North America, Highway 407, which is a toll route across the GTA, and other various highways, including 400, 403, 404, and the Kiwi W that connects Toronto to Fort Erie. Next slide. Okay. So policies and decision makers for highway projects. So infrastructure projects like highway construction in Ontario operate under a robust legal framework. Two pieces of key legislation that guide these developments include the Environmental Assessment Act, or EAA, and the Ontario Planning Act. So I'll go over the normal process of what it should have looked like, but as some of you know, with the passing of Bill 212, this process has changed. So normally, the Environmental Assessment Act is supposed to ensure that potential environmental impacts are studied and mitigated before a project proceeds, and it involves public consultation and evaluation of alternatives to minimize ecological harm. The Ontario Planning Act, on the other hand, it governs the land use and planning to ensure sustainable development. And it also establishes zoning, official plans, and rules for land development and infrastructure projects. So both of these acts, they work together to balance development needs with environmental protection and public interest. In terms of the key public stakeholders, there's the Ministry of Transportation, which leads the planning, construction, and maintenance of highways across Ontario. And they also act as the primary project manager and decision maker. There's also the provincial cabinet, which provides oversight and final approvals for large-scale infrastructure projects. And they also allocate funding and ensure alignment with provincial priorities. Another major public stakeholder is Environment and Climate Change Canada, or ECCC. And what they do is they monitor federal environmental laws and regulations, such as the Species at Risk Act, or SARA, and they ensure that projects protect biodiversity and don't harm critical habitats or endangered species. The municipal government or city governments also play a big role, as they play a vital role in local land use and planning and zoning, and they collaborate with the province to address different community concerns and the impacts of highway projects. So I had mentioned that normally how highway projects go is they're governed by the Environmental Assessment Act and the Ontario Planning Act. And I mentioned that had changed. So in terms of how that changed, Ontario's Bill 212, also known as the Reducing Gridlock Act or Reducing Gridlock Saving You Time Act, was passed, and it received royal assent on November 25th, 2024. And what this legislation did is it expedited the construction of priority highway projects, including Highway 413, and it granted the government authority to remove certain bike lanes in Ontario cities. So this act, it significantly altered the traditional EAA assessment process, and it exempted Highway 413 from many standard Environmental Assessment Act requirements, streamlining the approval process to reduce delays. The Ontario government has stated that this was aimed at addressing gridlock so that they could expedite construction and speed up timelines. Although the Bill 212 was passed and Highway 413 was exempted from certain EAA requirements, Environment and Climate Change Canada, they still enforce the Species at Risk Act, or SARA, and they still have to ensure that the project complies with federal laws by protecting critical species and their habitats. Next slide.
So now we're going to chat about the environmental and social consequences. Next slide. So speaking to the maps that we had previously seen, and discussions around assessment, it's really important for us to understand in further detail the environmental impacts of Highway 413. Now, the first key point I want to bring up is the impacted ecosystems and wildlife habitats. So Highway 413 will cause destruction to natural areas. It is projected to destroy approximately 1,000 hectares of significant natural areas, including 400 acres of Ontario's Greenbelt and the Nashville Conservation Reserve. These areas are vital for biodiversity, providing habitats, water filtration, and carbon storage. The other key point in terms of ecosystems and habitats is the impact on waterway crossings, which is what I was showing all of you in the first map that I went over. And that is the highway will cross 132 streams and rivers, including key watersheds such as Humber River, Credit River, and Etobicoke Creek. And these crossings risk sedimentation, pollution, and contamination of freshwater ecosystems. From the damage to the natural areas and waterways, we then see the next major risk, which is threatening species habitats and species survival. Highway 413 threatens the habitats of 29 federally listed endangered and threatened species, including the red-headed woodpecker, the red-side dace, which is a fish. A red-headed woodpecker would be impacted because of habitat loss in critical breeding areas. The red-side dace would be impacted as a result of the streams that they live in becoming contaminated. Jefferson salamander would suffer as a result of fragmentation and road mortality, which would devastate their populations. The next key environmental impact is deforestation. Significant deforestation is expected along the route, particularly in the Greenbelt protected woodlands. This will disrupt wildlife corridors and remove natural carbon sinks essential for combating climate change. Waterway disruption, as we mentioned, this is really going to alter water flow, increase sedimentation, and introduce contaminants. This will degrade the water quality as well as aquatic habitats and affect both biodiversity and our ability to manage floods. And you may remember just last year in the summertime, there was flooding in Toronto in the Don Valley area specifically. So it's really important that we protect our ecosystem services that help us mitigate the impacts of flooding. The next key environmental impact is greenhouse gas emissions. Highway 413 is projected to significantly increase Ontario's vehicle emissions. Estimates suggest over 700,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions will be increased. And this increases it, contradicting the Ontario's Made in Ontario Environment plans, which was to reduce emissions by 30% below 2005's levels by 2030. And this also conflicts with Canada's federal commitments under the Paris Agreement. The third key point that we want to talk about when discussing environmental consequences is, of course, the overall alignment. This highway does not align with Canada and Ontario's commitments to the environment. The destruction of Greenbelt lands and critical ecosystems contradicts Ontario's Greenbelt Act, which was established in 2005, which aims to protect natural areas, water resources, and farmland. The highway's projected increase in greenhouse gas emissions will oppose the objectives of Ontario's Climate Change Mitigation and Low Carbon Economy Act, which basically prioritizes lowering the emissions to meet the global climate commitments. And then as well as Joelle had mentioned, with the Species at Risk Act and Ontario's Endangered Species Act, this also conflicts with those two acts. Next slide. So I did want to show you guys some of the species. Contrary to what the premier has said, it is not just a grasshopper, it is a lot of species. And so the first one you see here on the left is the red-side dace. It is, of course, it lives in the streams that we were speaking of, so it will be impacted by water contamination. In the middle, you see Jefferson salamander, which we said would be impacted by fragmentation and road mortality. And then we have the gorgeous red-headed woodpecker, which would be impacted by deforestation and loss of critical breeding habitats. Next slide. Now, to really send the message home, I wanted to include this simplified map by environmental defense. And the tractor icons that you see on the map, those dark green tractor icons, of course, they represent the farmland that's going to be impacted. When we look at the green shaded areas, that is the green belt, which is a protected zone established to conserve farmland, forests, wetlands, and vital ecosystems. And the greenbelt is protected for a reason. It ensures environmental stability, water protection, and it really acts as a buffer against urban sprawl. So to continue infringing on this protection sets a dangerous precedent. Especially, it undermines the years of conservation work that's been done in Ontario. Another really important factor is, of course, this yellow line that you see that runs parallel to Highway 413. And we are going to draw more attention to this as we go further along, but this is Highway 407. Highway 407 is already built, and it is an underutilized highway. It's a toll highway, so it's privately owned, and it's also part of it is publicly owned. And it's under capacity. So we will be looking at Highway 407's capacity and its potential as an alternative solution. Next slide. So now let's chat about the green belt, as this has been a central topic that is crucial to understand Highway 413 and understand the environmental impacts. Ontario's Greenbelt was established in 2005 through the Greenbelt Act, and it is the largest of its kind in the world. It protects over 2 million acres of farmland, forests, wetlands, rivers, and lakes. One of the key reasons why the Greenbelt was established was created to stop urban sprawl, protect agricultural land, and preserve ecosystems that are critical to Ontario's environmental health. For those of you that are interested in the financial benefits of Ontario's Greenbelt, it actually provides ecosystem services that are worth an estimated $3.2 billion every year. These services include filtering our water, controlling floods, storing carbon, as well as it even offers recreational spaces. So these aren't just environmental benefits, they directly impact our communities by helping manage flooding and climate change, and they contribute significantly to Ontario's economy. Now, Highway 413 specifically threatens to pave over 400 acres of the Greenbelt. So this isn't just about the loss of protected land, it sets a dangerous precedent for the future. If we allow this highway to go through, what's to stop further developments from chipping away at the Greenbelt further? These risks undermine everything the Greenbelt was pretty much created to protect. And so not only would it fragment habitats, it's disrupting wildlife corridors, and the Greenbelt really does support us in protecting against extreme weather events. Now, when we look at Ontario's Greenbelt and how this Highway 413 plays in, it's really undermining these values that the Greenbelt is providing for us. So while infrastructure is important, we need to ask if this kind of development is worth the irreversible damage to protected lands. Highway 413 isn't just a road, it's a turning point that could decide whether the Greenbelt remains protected for the future or becomes vulnerable to further destruction. Next slide.
Okay, so now we're going to be talking about social impact, how does Highway 413 impact communities, impact society, impact people like you and me. So before I get in, can anyone give me a thumbs up in the chat if you like organic food, if you like farmers markets? If your camera's on, you can also give me a thumbs up too if you like, yeah, no? Okay, perfect. I see some people like food, organic food, and farmers markets. So Highway 413 has a really large impact on farmland, as well as farms and landowners. The proposed Highway 413 threatens to disrupt a number of family-owned farms, such as the Orr family farm, which is a farm in King City, and they stand to lose about 25% of their land. This loss would fragment their grain farming and maple syrup production operations and make efficient farming challenging and potentially rendering some areas inaccessible to machinery. So the total estimated amount of farmland that's going to be lost is approximately 2,000 acres of farmland, which is a really large size of land. Such disruptions jeopardize the livelihoods of farmers and threaten local food security. Right now, we have a food and housing crisis in Toronto and in the GTA. So with the loss of this farmland, it would really exacerbate a lot of those issues. And we may see smaller number of farmers markets, especially the organic ones as well. In addition to that, there was a lot of concerns when it comes from Indigenous communities. So Indigenous leaders have raised significant concerns regarding the consultation process for Highway 413. They only had a 30-day consultation period, and the Ontario Regional Chief, Abraham Benedict, had criticized this 30-day consultation period. And he said it was inadequate, and it was warning that it could lead to legal actions in the future. Leaders from the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and Six Nations of the Grand River have also expressed dissatisfaction with the lack of meaningful dialogue concerning treaty areas. Some Indigenous communities have ceased participation in discussion, citing insufficient engagement. And, during this social time, we really emphasize the importance of truth and reconciliation and Indigenous relationships. And Highway 413 has got about it all wrong when it comes to practicing truth and reconciliation and getting Indigenous perspectives. Businesses and land right implications are really strong. The construction of Highway 413 involves the acquisition of private lands, and this impacts a lot of landowner rights and local businesses as well. The Ontario government has already initiated this process for the land, offering compensation at fair market value. However, when we look at this has led to uncertainty and concern among landowners about the future of their properties and businesses. It's already really hard to purchase land here in the GTA, and this is only exacerbating that issue and causing problems as well, causing a lot of insecurity for landowners and people who would like to become future landowners in this area. The potential displacement and disruption raises a lot of significant social and economic issues for the affected communities. So now we're going to take a little closer look at some of the implications within the three categories of health, equity, and accessibility when it comes to the future implications. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as I said, we're going to be talking about health, equity, and accessibility. So when we are assessing the overall social impact, it's really important to understand these implications in these three categories because it really hits home for these three specifically. So when we talk about impacts on rural and urban communities, for rural communities, Highway 413 poses a major threat to rural areas, as we said, like King City. We talked about the Orris family and their potential of losing 25% of their land, as well as the fragmentation of farmland makes agricultural operations less efficient and it threatens the long-term sustainability of these farms. Beyond farmland, the highway will permanently alter the character of rural communities by disrupting natural habitats and green spaces. As earlier mentioned earlier, it's not just grasshoppers that are impacted. It's a whole ecosystem, and that ecosystem in turn impacts a lot of the produce and the farming that we receive in the GTA as well. And the rural way of life as a whole, deeply connected to farming and local ecosystems, will be at risk. When it comes to urban communities, urban areas could face increased urban sprawl due to Highway 413, which is putting additional pressure on infrastructure like schools, hospitals, and public transit, all of which are at capacity. Sometimes you'll look at classrooms and there will be like 30, 40 students to one teacher, and there's a lot of issues with not having proper teacher to student ratios as it is. Hospitals don't have enough staff, nurses, doctors, and public transit. As you can see, sometimes if you take the TTC, if the train is gone and we have a shuttle bus, there's like 600 people trying to get on a bus where there's only like 30 seats. It's not very efficient or effective means of transportation. So Highway 413 would really put that into perspective. You'd have 1,000 people waiting for one shuttle bus as opposed to just 600. And the loss of nearby farmland and natural spaces, it diminishes the quality of life for urban residents who rely on these areas for recreation, clean air, and a sense of balance in increasingly dense cities. I know in the chat there was some talk about like wonderful hike in the Don Mills area. We would lose a lot of hiking spaces and a lot of that green space, that natural nature is healing would be a more rare practice because we wouldn't have that much spaces and it would be a much denser urban environment. And a development that follows the highway may benefit some people, but risks creating imbalances in housing affordability and infrastructure readiness, which is already, again, a really huge issue in the GTA. When we're looking at public health, property value, and community cohesion, for public health, highways often bring increased air and noise pollution. So, especially for communities located nearby, more vehicles means higher emissions of pollutants like nitrogen dioxide, contributing to respiratory and cardiovascular issues. The loss of green spaces, it exacerbates these problems by removing natural filters for air quality and spaces that promote mental health through outdoor activities. You know, they say like go outside and touch some grass. Well, there's not really gonna be like grass left for people to touch, for people to feel connected to nature. When it comes to this increase of like air pollution and noise pollution as well. And in regards to property values, properties near the highway, they may see declining values due to noise, pollution, and decreased appeal. Conversely, land open for development may see skyrocketing prices, pushing housing affordability out of reach for many residents. This unequal distribution of impact risks creating economic divides in communities affected by the highway. For community cohesion, the physical presence of Highway 413 could act as a dividing line, particularly in rural areas and indigenous lands. It risks deepening tensions between groups advocating for economic development and those prioritizing environmental preservation and social equity. The sense of shared community and cultural heritage could suffer as a result. When we talk about equity and accessibility concerns, for equity concerns, Highway 413 disproportionately affects marginalized groups, BIPOC, women, those who have a disability, primarily Indigenous communities as well. Indigenous communities have faced inadequate consultation processes, so that 30-day process that's been criticized, as well as rural residents are losing their land and livelihood with limited resources. These groups are often left out of meaningful decision-making processes, raising significant concerns about fairness and justice. It kind of sets a future precedence that the opinions of marginalized group, the opinions of Indigenous people in Indigenous land is no longer a requirement or a necessity when it comes to changing infrastructure, and that is not a precedent that we want to have in the future. When we talk about accessibility concerns, Highway 413 is a project that prioritizes car-based transportation, so it leaves behind those who depend on public transit or can't afford private vehicles. This focus widens transportation inequalities, especially for those who are low income, for seniors and people who are living in rural areas who already struggle with access to essential services. So investing in more inclusive transportation options like public transit would better address these accessibility gaps. So in terms of like our precedents, the impact and the takeaway to have from the social impacts of Highway 413 is that the advancement of Highway 413 sets a concerning precedent for future infrastructure projects, as it expedited processes and limited consultation undermines protections for community interests and environmental standards, that this approach risks eroding trust between the government, local communities, and Indigenous groups. Farmers, Indigenous communities, small businesses, and landowners face farmland loss, inadequate consultation, and economic disruptions, that the highway threatens both rural and urban communities by increasing health risk, lowering property values, and weakening community cohesion. It prioritizes car-based infrastructure over sustainable alternatives and risks deepening existing disparities, leaving vulnerable populations behind. And to ensure equitable and sustainable growth, infrastructure development must balance progress with respect for community rights, environmental stewardship, and long-term well-being. Next slide, please.
So now we are going to chat about relevant provincial and federal acts. I know Joel explained these acts, and he also went over the controversial passing of Bill 212. However, I do want everyone to take away that there are still things that we can do, especially policy speaking. And we're going to go over those safeguards and those provincial protections. So specifically under federal protections, there is the Impact Assessment Act, the IAA, which although the initial federal review was rejected, reassessment is possible if new risks are identified, such as the unstudied impacts on biodiversity as well as climate change. There's also the Fisheries Act, which protects fish habitats. So complaints can trigger enforcement by the DFO, which is Fisheries and Oceans Canada, as well as Joel had said, SARA, which is the Species at Risk Act. So federal intervention is required if critical habitats for endangered species like the red-side dace are threatened. And then the last one for federal protections is the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, which addresses pollution risks, including air and water contamination, which may harm ecosystems under federal jurisdiction, and as well as all of these violations can lead to federal interventions and enforceable actions. Now, when it comes to provincial safeguards, of course, the Environmental Assessment Act, which is the EAA, while Bill 212 significantly changed this process, as Joel had said, there can still be public and legal challenges which demand higher level reviews, as well as there's also the Clean Water Act, which focuses on risks to drinking water and watershed health, and local municipalities can oppose based on contamination concerns. And finally, in terms of provincial acts, there's also the Greenbelt Act and Oak Ridges Moraine Act, which protects the Greenbelt. So it's a very clear violation of that. And I do want to also say that in terms of precedent, Highway 407 is very relevant because Highway 407, unlike 413, actually followed the full Ontario environmental assessment on the provincial level. So this included extensive public consultation, addresses to community concerns, as well as implementing environmental safeguards to minimize ecological risk and damage. So this really does serve as a benchmark of the kind of due diligence we want for highways within Ontario, as well as it also begs the question of like, why is Highway 4 and 3 avoiding going through these assessments and these reviews? And of course, as Shani had mentioned, there's a major gap in the current process, and that is because there was a huge lack of consultation with Indigenous communities. And the reason why there was a lack of consultation is because in Bill 212, it also stated that, you know, consultations would be decreased, as well as bike lanes and, of course, the environmental assessment. So this not only will increase the chances of legal actions, but it's directly infringing on Section 35 of our Constitution, which protects Indigenous rights to land and resources. And so insufficient consultation is likely to lead to future legal challenges and delays while failing to respect the cultural and ecological concerns of Indigenous groups. And so you may be wondering, what does that process look like? Well, the process looks like, of course, requesting reassessments for the assessments that have been done or that have been, you know, rejected or kind of pushed aside. It's collecting evidence. It's, of course, demanding, you know, we are strong in numbers. And so demanding this level of review from the public is super duper important for us to be able to really put our rights here in play. Next slide.
So alternative solutions. What other solutions are available? Next slide. So when we talk about alternative solutions, one of the key components is exploring sustainable transportation options. So I'm going to go over a few sustainable transportation options that could be a valuable alternative to Highway 413. So the first one is bus rapid transit systems, or BRT. Cities like Bogota and Curitiba, Brazil, have implemented successful BRT systems, and these systems provide efficient, high-capacity public transit. They reduce reliance on personal vehicles, and they also improve urban mobility. So a BRT, they provide dedicated bus lanes that could also help minimize travel delays. They also have faster construction timelines and lower cost compared to rail systems, and they improve accessibility for underserved areas. A big benefit of BRTs is that they could provide very high passenger volumes with high frequency. They can efficiently accommodate a large amount of passengers, which could then reduce the strain on road networks and also help with traffic alleviation by providing reliable alternatives to car travel. Another benefit of BRT is that it is a sustainable alternative because buses can hold a lot more people than a single car can. And with the new technology such as hydrogen fuel cell or electric buses, there's going to be a lot less emissions with people taking BRTs rather than in their own personal car. So another sustainable option is a comprehensive cycling network or comprehensive cycling infrastructure. So if you look at some case studies such as Amsterdam and Copenhagen, they're renowned for their extensive cycling networks. And these cities have successfully promoted biking as a primary mode of urban transportation, which has drastically reduced car dependencies. In terms of cycling infrastructure, one key aspect is having separated bike lanes, which provides safety for the bike riders. And it also provides more comfort for car drivers because then you don't have cyclists driving on the road. If we were to have a comprehensive cycling network, some things that you would see would be ample bike parking and proper integration with public transit systems, as well as government policies that encourage cycling through incentives and education. In terms of cost effectiveness of transit and active transportation modes, they have a lot of benefits, such as lower capital and maintenance costs. We know that public transit and cycling infrastructure can often require a lot less capital investment and maintenance than highway construction, as well as the long-term savings. When we encourage public and active transportation, it reduces wear and tear on roadways and highways, which would cut future repair costs, as well as the economic and social benefits. Transit and active transportation, they increase accessibility and equity, while they support urban density and livability. Next slide. So in terms of the numbers, here's a breakdown of the current percentages for each relevant mode of transportation in Ontario, in the GTA. So this data is from the 2016 census. And here you see that the automobile is 66.5%. So this data here is based off of commutes, people going to work and back to their house. So the majority of commuters in the GTA rely on automobiles, which highlights the region's car dependency. This number, though, does have some stipulations, as, say, for example, in Toronto, the number breakdown looks a lot different. If you look at commutes between 0 and 49 kilometers, the numbers are completely flipped, because in Toronto, 24.9% of people use an automobile to commute to work, whereas 58.1% use public transit and almost 12% walk. So what does this mean? It means that in cities with a robust public transportation network, people are willing to take public transit over their own personal vehicle. And while Toronto's transit network isn't perfect, it does show that it still is a reliable system in getting a lot of people where they need to go. This high percentage in terms of the GTA wide of the 66.5%, it reflects factors such as urban sprawl, limited public transit options, and the cultural preference for personal vehicles. As we know, Toronto is the largest city in Canada, and especially when comparing it to other cities in the GTA, there's not really any city that has the same level of public transportation network as Toronto does, which is why the numbers in Toronto for public transportation usage are so high compared to other cities in the GTA. So this reliance on automobiles, it contributes to congestion, pollution, and increased infrastructure costs. In terms of public transit's impact on congestion, public transit, as you can see, it makes up 27% of commuters, and what this means is that a significant portion that while a significant portion of the population uses it, there's still a lot of room for improvement, and increasing investment in public transit can reduce congestion by shifting more people from cars to buses, subways, and trains. And efficient public transit systems lead to fewer vehicles on the road, which will reduce travel times and lower emissions. In terms of the biking and walking and other active modes, while biking and walking make up only 6.5% of commutes, these options contribute to sustainable and healthy urban mobility. Policies like Bill 212 that aim to reduce or remove cycling lanes can discourage active transportation, and it will force more people to rely on cars. We know that bike lanes do not make traffic worse, and they actually encourage a shift away from personal vehicles, and it also promotes sustainable city planning. The provincial government has proposed additional public transit routes, the highways, but the feasibility and effectiveness of the projects still remain unclear. There is precedent worldwide, though, for transit on highways such as Istanbul, Ottawa, and Bogota, where public transit buses operate on or beside highways and dedicated lanes. And however, this doesn't necessarily replace investments into public transit, and highways are still traditionally car-centric, so integrating transit would require significant investment and infrastructure changes. Next slide.
So we are going to take a 5-minute break here, and that is because, and so many of you guys are on point. You guys know about 407. You're asking questions about 407. We will be going into 407 and the costs of Highway 413 and actions that all of you can take in a fun little engagement activity. So take your 5 minutes. We will be back at about, let's say, 7:03, and then we can finish the final part of the workshop. Okay, let's get back to the workshop. I'll just wait for everybody and my team to turn their cameras back on. I hope you enjoyed your little break, and now we'll get into the last section of the workshop. Just waiting for my team. Okay. Okay, let's hit next slide. So a lot of you have mentioned Highway 407, so I'm very happy that that's the case, and I will be going over Highway 407 right now. And so what is Highway 407? Highway 407 is a 108-kilometer toll route between Pickering and Burlington, currently operating below its capacity. And one of the key methods up for discussion right now is the potential of subsidizing tolls on Highway 407 for trucks that would otherwise be on the 401. And so this idea can lead to less congestion on the busy Highway 401. This shift could remove between 12,000 to 21,000 trucks daily from Highway 401, and it significantly would ease traffic congestion and improve travel times for all road users. Financially, this approach is also beneficial because the estimated cost of subsidizing tolls on Highway 407 is $4 billion over 30 years, whereas constructing Highway 413 is estimated to cost up to $10 billion. And we're going to go over the actual cost benefit analysis as we go further along, but hold on to that number for now. And so this would mean that we're essentially saving billions of dollars by optimizing existing infrastructure that we already have. And so environmentally speaking, leveraging Highway 407 helps preserve valuable farmland, natural habitats that would otherwise be disrupted and destroyed by new construction. As well as this strategy of 407 actually aligns better with our sustainable development goals and demonstrates our commitment to actually meeting our environmental policies and laws that we have in place. And when we talk about Highway 407, it's really important for us to understand the ownership structure of Highway 407. So I do want to share that Highway 407 is not entirely owned by the provincial government. So in 1999, the Ontario government sold a significant portion of Highway 407 to a private consortium, which is a group of private companies, as a 99-year lease for $3.1 billion to try and reduce provincial debt. And so currently the ownership structure looks like 50% of it is owned by the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board. 43.23% of it is owned by Sintra Global, which is a subsidiary of a Spanish firm. And 6.76% is owned by Atkins Realis, which was formerly known as SNC-Lavalin. And now you may be wondering, well, what does that leave the Ontario government if that much of it is owned by all of these private companies? Well, the Ontario government owns the Highway 407's east extension. And so this includes the sections extending east of Brock Road in Pickering, connecting to Highway 35, 115 in Clarington. And that part of it, so that just that east extension of it is operated and overseen by the Ontario Ministry of Transportation, so the MTO. And it's operated, of course, toll-free for drivers, unlike the private part, which you have to pay to use. And so this extension that the provincial government owns was actually built after the initial lease was sold to the private companies. And so given this ownership structure, any initiatives to reduce tolls or modify usage on Highway 407 would require negotiations between all of the stakeholders that we mentioned, and of course the provincial government. Premier Doug Ford has indicated a willingness to engage in discussions about Highway 407, potentially buying it back to alleviate traffic congestions. However, I am sad to report that as of November 2024, representatives from Highway 407 clarified that no active discussions around a buyback are taking place. And so in summary, Highway 407, utilizing that instead of creating a whole new highway, it offers a practical solution to the traffic congestion issue, as well as it offers so many economic benefits, saves literally billions of dollars, and it upholds our environmental values. However, of course, with the complex ownership structure, careful negotiations are required to be able to use this instead. Next slide. And I have been alluding to this quite a bit in the workshop, and I do think it's really important to chat about this side of things, which is what is the cost of Highway 413? So unfortunately, even though Highway 413 is one of Ontario's most debated projects yet, as of January 2025, we still do not have an official figure released by the Ontario provincial government. And so this has left many of us wondering, including myself, where will the money come from, and why isn't there more transparency on how a super big project like this is going to be funded? And external reports from a variety of resources say that this project could range anywhere from $6 billion to $10 billion. Environmental defense estimates it to cost $6 billion back in 2020, while other sources like the Toronto Star say it could climb even higher. And by 2024, the Auditor General of Ontario noted that the project could easily exceed over $4 billion, with some critics saying that it could double that number. Next slide. And so now let's dive into a bit of a cost analysis here, cost benefit analysis. So the estimated cost of Highway 413 is $6 to $10 billion, but of course, as I said, we do not have an official number. So that also means that we don't know where that money is coming from. But as you saw in that little graphic that I included on the previous slide, historically, major highway projects have been funded through taxpayer dollars, as well as they've been funded through long-term borrowing, which was seen in the 400 series highways. So while we don't know what the number is in terms of the cost benefit, we also don't know if, let's say, private partnerships are going to be used to fund this new highway. That obviously was the case in terms of Highway 407, but still there were taxpayer dollars obviously involved in the mix, as well as, the lack of transparency is really making it difficult for all of us to form an even more advanced opinion on all of these factors. And so, we also need to think about hidden costs. So things like land acquisitions, the government also has not released the cost of that. When we look at something really interesting has happened, the MTO, so the Ministry of Transportation, it's actually been ordered to release more detailed figures by the Information and Privacy Commissioner, which highlights concern about whether that full price tag is being understated here. And so I don't know, it could even surpass the amounts that we're talking about here. And as you know, with highways, there's also expansion projects that happen after. Like 407, it wasn't just an initial building process. There were several expansion projects that happened afterwards. So it's costed several billions of dollars to build that. And that'll be the same case for Highway 413. And so when we look at the proposed economic benefits like faster good movement, temporary construction jobs, it just doesn't paint the full picture. The primary beneficiaries of Highway 413 are likely to be developers and logistics companies who stand to gain from the urban sprawl along the route of the highway. So for everyday Ontarians like myself and like you folks, particularly those in rural and urban communities, the trade-offs are significant. We're losing farmland. We're obviously going to have to deal with the environmental degradation at some point, even though the provincial government wants to kind of push that back and act like it's not a primary concern right now. And then on top of that, we're going to deal with the heavier financial burden on taxpayers. And at the same time, as Joelle was saying, the current state of public transportation in the GTA is really struggling. And so we really need these investments into public transportation. For example, the Go Transit 96 bus, which operates between the Finch bus terminal and Durham College Oshawa Go, has a service frequency of 70 to 115 minutes. So that means that if a passenger misses a bus, they could wait over an hour to be able to get on the next one. And so such infrequent service highlights the importance of investing in public transportation to reduce these wait times and improve reliability. And so the better investment is clear. Public transportation is desperately needed, whether we want to invest in it now or later. Expanding transit options and optimizing existing infrastructure like Highway 407 is super important and would offer the same benefits of actually, solving the congestion issues, as well as it's simply just not a good financial investment, because you can't cut corners when it comes to public transportation and sustainable urban planning. The trade-offs are just not feasible, and they aren't something that's going to benefit everybody in the long run. So public transportation is the sustainable long-term solution that supports low-income communities and reduces emissions, and also will strengthen accessibility for everyone, not just people who have cars. Next slide. And so quickly going over pros and cons here. So when we look at what the benefits of Highway 413 are, or the proposed benefits of it, so it's proposed that it may improve connectivity by linking different highways like 400, 401, 407, and it may create short-term economic opportunities through like construction jobs, temporary construction jobs, and surrounding development areas. However, these benefits are, of course, uncertain, and when it comes to the actual research on whether it's going to improve road times and create faster travel times, it's actually there is no sufficient research that proves that. Instead, there's research that supports that highways often lead to induced demand, where additional lanes are needed to actually meet the demand for using that highways. And so eventually it's leading to more congestion, if not similar, worse than before. And on the downside, I mean, we spoke about many of these cons to you folks already. 2,000 acres of farmland, 400 acres of the green belt, $6 to $10 billion commitment, which is a massive financial commitment, as well as it's going to fragment communities. It's also on the note about job creation. This can also be made through investments in public transportation. And we see that. I mean, if any of you folks have read the City of Toronto's 2025 budget, you know that increased personnel on TTC, as well as creating more trains and creating more opportunities within TTC, that's also creating more jobs. So the idea of it being a good investment just because it'll create temporary jobs is actually not a good argument at all. And perhaps the most concerning factor about this is that the project prioritizes car-based infrastructure over much-needed public transit. So Highway 413 represents a decision to invest in the past, whereas public transportation is an investment for the future. And we have seen this in so many places across continents like Europe and countries like Japan, where public transportation has done massive benefits for the economy and for people in cities. Next slide.
So one thing that can be done is different collective action projects. This is through coalitions, so partnerships where two or more organizations collaborate towards a shared goal. So in Toronto, regarding green infrastructure, there is a Green Infrastructure Ontario, or GIO, coalition, and they exemplify this approach. It was founded in 2009, and the GIO is an alliance of organizations united by a common vision for a healthy green Ontario. They work to promote awareness and understanding of green infrastructure, as well as support policies and activities that increase its implementation province-wide. Then on a global scale, there is multiple coalitions as well, but a large one is the International Coalition for Sustainable Infrastructure, or ICSI. It was established in 2019, and it brings together engineers from 150 different countries. The goal is to accelerate the planning, design, construction, and operation of safe, sustainable, and resilient infrastructures, with the aim of making about 2,000 cities more resilient by the year 2030, particularly countries in the global south. These coalitions demonstrate the power of collective action by pooling resources, sharing expertise, and uniting diverse stakeholders. They can tackle complex challenges more effectively than individual entities working alone. This collaborative approach is crucial for addressing issues such as climate change, urban sprawl, sustainable development, and emphasizes that solving these larger issues requires teamwork across sectors and geographies. It's not up to one group or organization on their own. Next slide, please. So looking at some examples that are similar to Highway 413, we have Foothill South Toll Road 241. It was in California, so it was a toll extension that was planned to run from Orange County to San Diego County, and it was going to consist of 5 interchanges. This would heavily impact the San Mateo Creek watershed and the San Onofre State Beach, as well as multiple wildlife conservatories. So on the map there, the green is the proposed extension, and you can see there's many green spaces and wilderness areas that are impacted. So San Onofre Beach is a protected state park that's popular for camping, surfing, different outdoor recreational activities, and it was the primary cause of concern regarding this extension. After a brief pause in 2008, well, it wasn't very brief, it was about an 8-year pause. So they paused the project in 2008, and then in 2016, finally canceled this extension after about 15 years of protest by over a dozen different environmental organizations. The most notable was a coalition that formed against this project, the Save San Onofre Coalition, and thanks to them, an agreement was reached that determined 7 action items. Included in those action items were the Transportation Corridor Agency, or the TCA, the entity that was responsible for this highway. They had to rescind their 2006 approval of the green alignment, which is what allowed construction to go through the beach in the first place. They also had to implement and create a coastal access management plan in order to mitigate construction impacts in the area regarding future projects. The TCA also had to create a fund for watershed protection as well as restoration in the projects in the area for any going forward. And if the TCA wanted to review alternative routes to this extension, as long as there was no impact on the sensitive areas that were impacted for this route, then the Save San Onofre Coalition and the environmental groups that were affiliated with it could not oppose any future routes as long as they did not impact these areas. Next slide, please. And then a case study that's a bit closer to home is in Toronto is the Spadina Expressway. So the Spadina Expressway was supposed to start at the southern end of Spadina Avenue and go up to the 401. Plans were made in the 1940s. The first phase of construction beginning in the 1960s. This part is now known as Allen Road. It is blue on the map there. And concerns regarding this project rose particularly after watching the impacts that highways and freeways had on people, the wildlife, and the environment down in the US. And people were getting concerned that that was going to happen up here. There was growing environmental concerns as the project loomed due to ravine areas being destroyed and the lack of green space in the proposed project. There also was growing concern from citizens due to losing their homes to the highway and how it was becoming a more car-centric system and leading to more increased pollution levels. These concerns led to a larger push for better public transportation systems instead of the expressway. The lead coalition for this project was Stop Spadina, Save Our City Coordinating Committee, and they were founded in 1969 by the University of Toronto professor Alan Power. This coalition pushed for legislative changes by attending council meetings. They approached different members of parliament. They held public protests, and this eventually led to the premier at the time, William Davis, in 1971, canceling the expressway, stating that it was a transportation system best for automobiles, not for people. So the red on the map was going to be where the rest of the proposed Spadina Expressway would be. And you can see it does cut through some green space there. Next slide, please.
All right, thank you, Karina. And right now we're going to hop into the advocacy and action, our final section of our presentation. So let's explore how we can create a change for a more sustainable future. So whether you're an individual like you and I, part of a group, or have a platform of some sort, you can make an impact. Together, we'll look into practical steps to take action and inspire others along the way. Right, so methods for change. There are actually many ways to advocate for sustainable alternatives and push for change. So you could start by raising awareness. Simple actions like sharing posts or starting conversations, those could spark interest in your community. As awareness grows, engage decision makers by writing letters or meeting with government officials to address concerns. So, to strengthen your efforts, collaborate with like-minded groups to amplify your voice and create a unified message. Next, you can use media to spread the word further, reaching more people and gaining broader support. And by building a community, you can engage by organizing events like workshops, and that will bring people together to take action. And lastly, use data to back up your points, making your arguments more persuasive and highlighting the urgency for change.
So now that we're talking about advocacy and action, there's different methods that people have tried for different projects, but the two key methods to stopping Highway 413 is petitions and lobbying at this point in time. So petitions are ideally ones from large coalitions or known organizations. Those are ones that will gain the most traction, get the most attention from higher up officials as well as the general public. So some examples, the David Suzuki Foundation has one, Environmental Defense, Yours to Protect, and there's so many more at the moment. Petitions show support in large numbers. They also generally offer alternative solutions, such as the increased public transit funding. They'll maybe offer solutions to where that funding can come from and how to rearrange the budget for that, as well as suggestions such as the trucks on the 407 solution proposed earlier. So petitioning and lobbying members of parliament and government officials, whether through organizations listed above, you also can do it. A lot of organizations will have like a template for emails or letters, phone calls. Some people arrange meetings with their MP, things like that. Get the word out. So the key strategy in this is showing strength in numbers and garnering support for the cause. Raising awareness and noise about the highway is the best way to see a solution. So when pushing to stop the highway, solutions are offered, including funding solutions and reorganization. This lobbying of members of parliament puts a federal push on it as well, and the federal government does have the authority to change the plan if vulnerable species are threatened, as we discussed earlier on. Although it also should be mentioned that they did decline performing the impact assessment prior, but as was discussed earlier by Joelle and Erlia, theoretically it could be re-brought up if there was enough concern from the public regarding that. Next slide, please. So what can everyone do today? What can you do today? The first thing that's really important in situations like this is to learn. Ensure you research the problem and have an understanding of it. This can be through networking, talking to people, reading articles, learning. And also, I would suggest learning from different perspectives from people on both sides of the problem. That gives you a bit more of an understanding of why some people are for it versus some who are against it, and ultimately helps you to make an informed decision, as well as it helps to understand both sides a little bit, as if you're going to be arguing for something, you have to understand where the other side is coming from as well and why they want it. You can get involved, so attend public forums, city council meetings, informative sessions by organizations such as this one, to become informed on the policy and implementation actions behind it. You want to raise awareness, so you can join the discussion through various social media posts, online campaigns, webinars, in-person events where they share stories, reports, different organizations for the cause. You can join groups, organizations, coalitions that have similar interests, goals, and objectives as you regarding the situation. And you want to participate. So you want to share what you know, what you've learned, and advocate for change at various levels. This can be as simple as talking to a friend about it, or it could be something a bit more, such as joining an organization, and petitioning or things like that. So there's various levels at this. It doesn't have to be that intense. You can just talk to a friend or family member. This also, all of this, all in all, encourages accountability and transparency as the project goes forward, whether the project goes forward or not. If there is record of people keeping an eye on things and ensuring legalities and things are followed, there's less likely to cut corners, and we hold everyone accountable. Next slide, please.
Hey, thank you, Karina. So we have reached that time of the night. We'll now be doing our engagement activities. So we're going to be playing a game of red light, green light, not to be confused by the very life-threatening game in the Squid Game show, although the severity of Highway 413 is just as important, and just as serious. So there is a Padlet link in the chat. And so what you're going to do is you're going to click on that link, and then you're going to have two threads. When we talk about red light, as a collective, we'll be discussing all the aspects of Highway 413 that make us want to pump the brake, and put up a big red light. So these are the guiding questions that you can make your comments on. So what are the key arguments for and against Highway 413? Because as Karina said, if you want to take a stance, you got to know both sides. And then how can these arguments be presented effectively? And then for green light, we're talking about some potential ways forwards and how we can put a stop to Highway 413. So look at your guiding questions, which are what are some things you can do today to make a change and take a stand? And what role does listening to diverse perspectives play in strengthening advocacy efforts? We did talk about like social impacts and some communities that were impacted. So kind of leaning towards that information that we shared there just to answer these two questions. You'll get about 10 minutes to just put your answers in the thread using that Padlet link. And then after that, we'll come back as a group and then we'll just talk about the answers. If you'd like to come off mute and talk about what you answered, that'd be great. If not, then that's okay. We'll review it together. So now, as Jennifer said in the chat, if you can click the link above and then just take 10 minutes. So we'll come back at 7:40 from the Padlet. It's up here, so as you guys put comments on there, they'll pop up. And after 7:40, we will come back as a group and just talk about our answers, and then we'll talk about our final takeaways. Sounds good? Thumbs up. Perfect.
Would someone demonstrate how to use Padlet?
Yes, absolutely. So when you open Padlet, in order for you to make a comment, you want to click that little speech bubble that's on the bottom there. And then once you click on it, it'll open up to the question, and then you'll be on the side at the very bottom right. It'll say add comment. As it was pointed out at the top, these are your two kind of guiding questions, and then you can write your comment, and once you're ready, you can click comment as well. And then you can also heart the question or the section or the answers that people put down. And then also if you want to change your name, if you want to keep it anonymous, you can be anonymous, or if you want to put your name there, you can also do that as well.
Thank you.
And once you have written down your answers for red light, if you feel like you don't have anything else you want to share for that section, then you can move on to green light. We're doing both at the same time just for the sake of time, but both equally as important to answer. Okay, I'm going to give everyone another 5 minutes, and then we will head into discussion.
I think we can take up answers now.
Okay, so is there anyone who would like to either hop off mute and talk about what they've written down? If not, then we can go through the answers on the board. No, that's okay. So Tina, if you can, thank you. So when we're looking at red light, some of the answers that we have were threatening so many species, which is an argument against Highway 413. Highway 413 will pave through precious farmland and endangered species, so that's another argument against it. They say in terms of an argument for the highway that it'll benefit the decrease of congestion. Let's see, Highway 413 threatens food security and also food prices, paving over farmland. So that's a big argument against Highway 413. We've got there are many negative impacts to the community and livelihood of farmers, the temporary construction jobs, so that's a positive, something for it. But a big argument against it is the cost and, of course, the damage of the 135 rivers and creeks. Damage to the green belt is also a huge argument against it. Highway 413 threatens food management, ecosystems. It'll address traffic congestion, so that's a four, and then also shorten commute time. But for against it, social, economic, and environmental impacts. So lots of answers talking about increased like food insecurity, increased damage to the environment, and a lot of what we can see based on the answers and also the information given on the session is that the main point for why they say Highway 413 is beneficial is for the temporary construction jobs and also for decreasing congestion. So in my opinion, I don't feel like it outweighs all of the negatives in order for it to be such a plus. It really feels like it would do a lot more harm than good. And I can see that that's an opinion that everyone here kind of shares. Oh, I see Nazia's answer. We have the destruction of farmland, impact of climate change, potential for increased urban sprawl, cost versus benefit, the 8 to $10 billion, as well as the 30 to 60 seconds per trip rather than the promised 30 minutes. Um, yeah, and then more like logistics and trucking as well. And then let's see, removing the tolls entirely and trucking for the 407 would help with logistics, raising public awareness to the press, talk, radio, podcast, social media, TV, talkback um, segments, and etc. So now we can move on to green light and see what some of the answers are. So these questions were what are some things you can do to make change and take a stand, and what's the importance of listening to diverse perspectives and what role does that play? So to make a change, we can take a stand by using the links that were posted. So there were so many beautiful petitions and links posted in the chat, not just by us at Terra, but by all of you. So kudos to you for being so on top of everything and being really active in your community and also, really wanting to take that stand. So we really appreciate you sharing all the resources that you have as well. Listening to diverse perspectives, yeah, it allows everyone's voice to be heard. It's important to listen to the voices of those impacted because we cannot assume the shared benefits. We all come from different socioeconomic backgrounds. One option not mentioned is nonviolent direct action, blocking roads, obstructing construction work, confusing surveys. If you want to take a very physical stance, that's one way to do it. Kind Shark, uh, lovely name too. Nonviolent direct action by the Kind Shark over here. And then we also have make a change, emailing your local MPP. Yeah, that's a really big one as well. You can contact your MP to tell them to do a reassessment. Yeah, organize campaigns and protests with your local MP. So getting your local politicians involved would really help drive some of that impact because they're some people who have, the power to make that change outside of the power that you have yourself, engaging our community through information sessions, signing a petition. So I know a petition was in the chat. So if you have a chance to please click that link and sign that as well, which is an advocacy letter that will be sent directly to the MP. And then learn more about alternative solutions as well as review the legislation designed to protect the greenbelt and harms the environment. I see we have a link here to civictech.ca. So develop predictive models, like the Toronto cycling infrastructure map, make it an election issue. That's a really big one. Contribute to public consultations, and then worst case, peaceful protests. So taking physical action in addition to making sure that you're educated and you're informed about everything that's going on. And then, yeah, it's essential to listen to diverse perspectives to get a balanced understanding of the pros and cons. As we said in the presentation, it's better to have an understanding of the situation as a whole when you understand both sides of the coin. And then thinking about designing some education posters, Highway 413 will make food costs go up and increase flooding, and it won't improve congestion. I think that's yeah. That's a really interesting comment there. I think that is really important when we talk about education to kind of pinpoint some of the factors of it that'll really get people's attention. The increase in food insecurity, the increase in driving up the price of housing, that'll really grab people's attention because it's already a present issue, and a pressing issue in the GTA and in our economy today. So really hammering in the fact that this is not something that's going to help that, it's actually going to make it worse, would really help with getting people involved. And then in-person networking, green drinks, solar drinks, Terra, Forward Earth and Climate North. That's fantastic. And yeah, and then making sure that we're supporting the parties and people that have our best interests in mind and are going against Highway 413. So these are all fantastic answers for both the red light and the green light, things that we can really go on and make a change, and things that we can pump the brakes and say, hold on and stop. So thank you all so much for participating in that activity. It was absolutely fantastic, and you should give yourselves a round of applause. I'm clapping, but you really can't hear it. That's okay. So you can use the reaction emojis if you'd like. And now we're just gonna go into our key takeaways. So thank you all again for doing that.
So final takeaways, of course, prioritizing long-term public good, investing in public transportation, as we said, making informed decisions, avoiding cutting corners, balancing growth and sustainability, as many of you did so well with that engagement activity. You can clearly see the pros and cons, and that the cons really do outweigh the pros with Highway 413. And as I started with that quote, I'm going to end with that quote as well. A truly sustainable future is one that thrives on shared spaces, shared resources, including billions of funding dollars, and shared opportunities. So by focusing on long-term balance, we can ensure Ontario's future is resilient, equitable, and built to benefit everyone, not just for today, but for generations to come. Next slide. So these are some of our social medias. If you would like to keep up to date with our events and things that were ongoing, we are potentially planning more of a in-person type of campaign for Highway 413. Also, other really cool upcoming stuff that we have include eco arts programs. We would like to also build a rain garden, but also host educational workshops on how to do so, green roofs, bioswales, a lot of these really important urban infrastructures. And another thing that they're going to post into the chat is a feedback survey. This will also help us give you all your engagement certificates for coming out today and actually participating with all of our session. So we really do appreciate you folks. And our next slide is just a simple thank you. We will end off on that note for today, but we really appreciate all of you, and we're really happy with your engagement and look forward to continued progress to hopefully stop Highway 413 and focus on urban sustainability that benefits the future. Thank you, everyone.